Okay, let's dive into this. Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're decoding the hidden forces of luck, psychology, and statistics in Brazilian soccer. Seriously, if you've ever watched a sports tournament and thought, man, what actually drives a team's success or failure? Well, you're in exactly the right place. We're going to dig into some absolutely fascinating research by Leon Esquiro and Sergio da Silva. They've basically stripped away all the usual myths using data from Brazil's top flight soccer league, Serie A, to uncover the actual math behind the madness.
So think about it. Why did your favorite team suddenly start losing? I mean, it's pretty much a universal frustration for any sports fan, right? You watch your team absolutely dominate the first half of a season. They're playing beautifully, they look completely unstoppable, and then, bam! Almost overnight, they just collapse. They suddenly can't string two passes together, the defense is leaking goals like a sieve, and just like that, the championship slips away. As fans, our brains immediately go into overdrive scrambling to find a reason for this sudden drop in form. We just demand answers. And you know what? Those answers usually sound exactly like these classic excuses. Oh, injuries impaired Team A. Or the refereeing was totally biased toward Team B. Or maybe, well, a change in management negatively affected the locker room. Pundits and fans alike just instantly invent these stories, right? We do it to explain away what are often just random fluctuations in a team's performance. Actually, the researchers behind our source material point directly to these exact types of causal excuses. We inherently favor these neat little narratives to explain how a club is doing. But here's the catch. In doing so, we completely neglect a massive invisible factor. To understand why we do this, we really have to look at how our brains process information. It all comes down to a battle between two systems in our minds. System 1, well, that's our automatic mind. It completely defaults to narratives. It absolutely loves simple causal explanations that make past events feel inevitable. Basically, it's the part of your brain screaming about bad referees. But then there's System 2. This is our analytical mind. It's the colder, calculating side that actually understands statistical randomness, luck, and math. But here's the thing. Because System 2 takes a lot more mental effort to fire up, we usually fall prey to what behavioral economists call the narrative fallacy. We just let System 1 invent a comforting story instead of facing the reality of plain mathematical luck.
Section 1. Regression to the mean. So let's force our analytical System 2 to wake up right now. We're going to transition to the actual science here and debunk some of these sports maths. The researchers looked at 3 recent seasons of First Division Brazilian Serie A data just to see what happens when we strip away all those emotional narratives. And the first major mathematical reality they found is a concept you really need to know: regression to the mean. By definition, regression to the mean is this statistical phenomenon where a really extreme outcome, so either incredibly good or incredibly bad, is highly likely to be followed by a much more average outcome. In the context of sports, it essentially just represents plain luck. Think about it. If a team is massively overperforming in the first half of a season, hitting every lucky shot and miraculously winning every tight game, well, statistical gravity dictates they're likely going to naturally drop off or regress toward the average in the second half. Let me give you a really dramatic real-world example straight from their data. Take a look at the 2017 Brazilian Serie A season. The champions that year, Corinthians, had an absolutely outstanding, extreme performance in the first half of the season. They racked up a massive 47 points. Fans were probably crediting pure tactical genius, right? But in the second half of the season, they absolutely plummeted to just 25 points. That is a wild drop. But this strong regression to the median wasn't some sudden curse or a magical loss of talent. No way. It was just an inevitable mathematical reality kicking in. That extreme overperformance simply leveled out. And this brilliantly illustrates that this phenomenon definitely isn't a one-off. Look at the very next year, the 2018 season. Here we see São Paulo scoring 41 points in the first half, only to be followed by a deeply disappointing second half of just 22 points. Then, on the flip side, look at Palmeiras. They had a decent, but not totally extreme 33 points in the first half. But then they surged from behind to score an incredible 47 points in the second half and became the champions. The researchers' statistical modeling across the 2016, 2017, and 2018 seasons confirms this over and over. You just cannot dismiss the role of statistical randomness and plain old luck in these wild performance swings. Section 2. The power of loss aversion. Now, right about now, you might be thinking, okay, so is it all just random math? Does human effort and motivation mean absolutely nothing? Well, the answer is no. While the math proves luck plays a huge role, human psychology still plays a very measurable, undeniable part in team performance. So let's look at the second major force the researchers analyzed. This force is known as loss aversion. Basically, it's this powerful psychological principle where the threat of losing something is actually a way stronger motivator than the prospect of gaining something of equal value. To test this in the context of soccer, the researchers set up a really dramatic scenario. They looked specifically at match day 28 out of the 38 in a season. They compared the performance of the bottom 8 teams. These are the underdogs fighting desperately to escape being relegated to a lower division against the top 8 teams, who were fighting for a spot in the super prestigious Copa Libertadores. And guess what? The researchers found a totally quantifiable difference in how these teams played when actual survival was on the line. And that difference is exactly 9.11%. When the threat of relegation was looming large in that final stretch of the season, the performance of those bottom-tier clubs actually improved by an average of 9.11 percentage points in their direct matches against the top-tier clubs. Let that sink in. The pure fear of dropping a division genuinely motivated them to play harder than the teams who were just trying to win a shiny prize. Now, what's really interesting about this slide is how incredibly clear the shift is. When we look at the first 10 direct match days between these two groups, the relegation-threatened teams won 32.21% of the available points against the top teams. Not bad. But look at the last 10 match days. This is when the reality of relegation becomes immediate and, frankly, terrifying. Their win points percentage suddenly jumps up to 41.32%. The data visually proves that underdogs absolutely perform relatively better when they have more to lose. I mean, loss aversion is very real, and it clearly works on the pitch. Section 3. Luck versus motivation. So what does this all mean? Well, it brings us to the ultimate question for any sports analyst, or really anyone trying to evaluate complex human performance. If we know, for a fact, that regression to the mean is constantly pulling extreme performances back to average, but we also know that psychological factors like loss aversion genuinely push teams to play better, how on earth do we disentangle the two? The researchers actually ran the arithmetic to see if one factor could completely explain the results without the other. First, they tested hypothesis A. What if we assume luck plays zero role and only loss aversion explains performance? Well, the math just doesn't work out. It leaves an unexplained residual gap of 1.6 points. Okay, fine. So what about hypothesis B? What if human motivation plays no role and only regression to the mean explains the performance changes? Surprisingly, that fails too. It leaves an unexplained residual of 0.7 points. The takeaway here, neither pure math nor pure psychology can explain the tournament results entirely on their own. To truly understand what's actually happening out there on the pitch, we have to synthesize these findings into a clear 3-step procedure. Step 1, you have to acknowledge statistical randomness. You just have to accept that plain old luck and regression to the mean are constantly operating in the background, whether you like it or not. Step 2, you need to factor in psychological motivation. You really have to look at the human element, realizing that teams facing an existential survival threat actually have a measurable cognitive advantage over those who are merely chasing ambition. And finally, step 3, combine both. True sports analysis absolutely must blend these cold mathematical realities with the messy human psychological element if you want an accurate picture of performance. Section 4. Rethinking sports performance. As we wrap up this explainer, it's time to bring all these amazing concepts together. Truly understanding these hidden forces requires us to actively fight against our own brains. We have to fiercely resist our automatic mind's urge to invent those simple, emotional stories about curses or bad referees or locker room drama, and instead, we need to look at the cold, hard data. So let's quickly summarize our key takeaways from this fascinating research on Brazilian Serie A. First, always remember the narrative fallacy. Your automatic System 1 brain absolutely loves to invent causal stories to explain things it just doesn't understand. Second, extreme performance naturally fluctuates due to statistical luck. That's our good friend, regression to the mean. Third, when the pressure is really on, survival actually motivates better than ambition, which perfectly proves the power of loss aversion. And finally, true, accurate analysis requires synthesizing both the underlying math and the human psychology. By keeping all these points in mind, you can look right past the noisy, hyper-emotional sports punditry and finally see the actual dynamics driving the game. But you know what? Let's leave the soccer pitch for just a second, because behavioral economics applies to every single one of us. I want to leave you with a final, rather provocative thought to chew on. When you look back at the extreme highs and lows of your own life, or your career, or your business, how much of your own success is actually a brilliant causal narrative you've proudly invented for yourself? And how much of it is just plain luck and regression to the mean? It's a pretty humbling question, right? But it's an absolutely crucial one if you want to see reality clearly. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and remember, always keep questioning those automatic assumptions.